Welcome back, loyal Masters of the Universe Classics fan, to another Director's Commentary with me, Scott, Toy Guru Netilich. And as you guessed from the scrolling image of this Norwegian-looking bearded guy with a giant metal arm, today we're doing none other than the beloved Fisto, the guy whose arm is, or hand is, twice as big as his head, because if anyone is going to rule with an iron fist, it's going to be, if anyone is going to fist someone to death, no, I can't say that either. All right, let's just get out of the way. This character is like the king of Masters of the Universe memes because his name is Fisto. And in the 80s, that was cool. In the 90s, maybe not so much. And by the 2000s, they changed his name to Battle Fist because, things you could get away with saying in the 80s just weren't the same as what you could get away with saying now. Times be a-changin'. And as cool as the character was in the 80s, for Masters of the Universe Classics, we wanted to give him the proper update he needed, bringing him into the Classics line with all other figures, and the Four Horsemen once again blew it out of the water. They did an amazing job with Fisto, not only capturing his vintage look, but his 2000X look, and, well, let's talk about it. So, he was a vintage figure, as noted, and he was really one of the more popular figures in the entire line, especially because he wasn't an original character. Meaning he wasn't from 81 or 82. He shipped later on in, I think, the fourth wave of figures, maybe the fifth. I lose count. But either way, for a figure who wasn't there from the very beginning, the way Merman and Man-at-Arms, Teel'a, He-Man were, he became extremely popular. Little known, or maybe well-known fact, is that his armor was actually going to get reused later on for another character, which is something that was going to come up again in the Classics line. Clamp Champ, if you notice, wears Fisto's armor just in a different color, because Clamp Champ was part of that fill-in wave to get figures to market very quickly with minimal new parts. So, hey, reusing armor's fun. Fisto was also one of the only characters in the vintage line that was a secondary character with his own mount. So Stridor, the robotic horse, was very much associated with Fisto, probably because they had artwork and were packaged together. Originally, the horses were meant to be for Skeletor and He-Man, but since Skeletor and He-Man already had their cats to ride around on, well, Fisto and Jitsu tended to get the robotic horses, which made them de facto arch enemies as well. So Fisto was kind of also one of those only secondary characters that not only had a mount, but he had his own arch enemy in the line, which was cool. But he was a core Masters figure. He was, again, even though he came out sort of midway through the run, he was really a beloved figure. And it was no surprise he was going to get updated for the 2000X Mike Young Productions animated series, now as Battle Fist, and we'll get into the copyright issues with the name in a moment. But like all the other redesigns for 2000X, the Horsemen and Mike Young Productions did an amazing job updating the character while still keeping the core attributes, from his beard to his giant fist, to his metal armor. He really does kind of look like a knight with a giant fist, and they updated his action feature from a spring-loaded punch to a button push that extended the fist part of the hand, which was great because the 2000X line was all about action features for the kids. It was a very kid-centric line. In the show, his origin was updated a little bit, and honestly, I have to go on record, I thought it was a little weird that before he got the Iron Fist, he had a giant human hand. I never assumed he needed a giant human hand before he got his. I assumed that getting the giant metal fist was like an upgrade. But, it was an upgrade, but it was an upgrade to an already existing huge human hand. So, hey, reasons. Why not? It was cool. And that was the way the Mike Young series took the character, and hey, it's legit. They also added another part of his origin tied into Teel'a. So Teel'a, obviously, being more of a teenager in the 2000X series versus Filmation, and most folks know that Teel'a was the adopted daughter of Man-at-Arms, who had raised her as his own, more or less. And she knew she was adopted, but, she still loved Man-at-Arms as a father. Her mother would be revealed as the Sorceress, which in Filmation she laid an egg and hatched Teel'a? Sure, why not? In the mini-comics, Teel'a was a clone, magically created by Skeletor, so hey, why not? Well, in the official family tree issued by Mattel, you'll notice that Teela''s biological father is noted as Fisto. Man-at-Arms is still the adopted father. You'll also note that Fisto and Man-at-Arms are brothers, so Teel'a is basically being raised by her uncle, not knowing that Fisto, who she refers to as her uncle, is actually her father. I know, someone's going to need therapy. Yeah, there's an episode where you see the sorceress flashback and meet this bandaged warrior who you can't see his face, and because it was a kid's show, they of course had to be married in order to have children, because, reasons. And so she married this warrior who she never saw his face, who turned out to be Fisto, and that would have been a reveal for season 3, but it never got to that. But the family tree, that was an official document from Mattel, backs that up. So, with his new origin behind him, tied to Teel'a and the sorceress as the sorceress's husband, hey, it was time to bring Fisto into classics for another action figure. This would have been his 3rd ever figure, and we were really excited to do it because he was just, I had him as a kid. I think most people had him who were He-Man fans, and he was a core figure. Now, we knew that fans were going to want more than just the vintage figure because in 2000X, because he played a large role in the show and he had a really cool figure and got that little Snake Man added detail on his gauntlet, his non-giant fist hand, that is, that fans were going to want sort of this version of him too. And we knew we weren't going to be able to do 2 completely different action figures. So, of course, the Horsemen, in their brilliance, because they always are, found an amazing solution for how to do 2 completely different looks with 1 action figure, with a few extra additional parts thrown in. So, the main Fisto, you had your classic head, meaning your vintage-looking head. You had your sword, which was borrowed from Triclops and repainted, just like in the vintage line. But additionally, he got accessories of his big giant sword, his head, and a new belt. So this was a way of sort of adding extra armor to Fisto to turn him into the 2000X figure, and it was the first character that got a new armor piece, meaning the belt, which I thought was just a brilliant, brilliant way of doing this. You just snap the belt on, and it really did transform a vintage look into a 2000X look very, very well. I was really impressed with the way the Horsemen knocked this out of the park and figured out a low-cost scenario of giving fans 2 different looks. Now, they did give him a holder for the giant sword in the back of the armor, which, as I mentioned earlier, in the vintage line, the figure Fisto shared armor with Clamp Champ. So this meant when we got to Clamp Champ in the Masters of the Universe Classics line, we weren't going to be able to reuse the armor. And that was actually something I had anticipated on in my tooling budget. But hey, that was a problem for future Scott. Current Scott was releasing Fisto, and he was going to focus on that. We'll let future Scott deal with those problems. So, Fisto was all set to get released, and once again, we were going to be able to call this character Fisto, because, as you know from 2000X, his name was changed to Battle Fist. But in Classics, we were able to resurrect his original name. Whether or not that name is politically correct these days is a story for another time, or another podcast, or some other blog somewhere. But hey, we're all about paying homage to the original line and the lore of Masters of the Universe. And you'll notice that Fisto has a trademark here, because we were able to trademark the name Fisto for the line, which was not possible for 2000X. Why is that? Well, if you've been following this channel, you'll know that often trademarks, if they're not used, get abandoned and are available for other toy companies. So we couldn't call Ninja Ninjor. We had to call him Ninja Warrior because Bandai at the time owned the trademark in the toy category for Ninjor. There's different categories. Like you could have had a shoe named Ninjor, but the toy is a category in trademark and copyright. Well, why is this? Well, if you haven't taken a wild guess yet, it's because of this squiddy-looking guy, Kit Fisto. So Kit Fisto, who was a registered trademark of Lucasfilm, I guess now Disney, scooped up the name while Mattel had Masters of the Universe on the back burner because they weren't producing MOTU toys during the time of the prequels. The trademark was up for grabs, and Kit Fisto got the trademark, and you'll see the TM there. Now, it's because we basically were kind of trademark ninjas, no pun intended for ninja there, and kind of jumped in when there was no Kit Fisto in production and got the name back, which is cool. And, I'm not saying this was revenge or anything for Ninjor, because, I'm not a Jedi, and okay, well, except for that one time in college when I was. All right, enough about trademarks. So I couldn't be doing a video about Fisto if I didn't talk about the issues with his production and when things went a little haywire. And to say they were out of control is an understatement. Essentially, two different toy production years were butting heads and smashing in. I shouldn't use a sports metaphor. We're toy collectors. I should use something more sci-fi, like, two planets colliding. There we go. That's something we can all understand better. So yeah, it was really like two planets smashing into each other, where you had one toy year ending and another toy year beginning. And I just kind of sat back and was watching this disaster and couldn't do a thing about it. And to say it was breaking my heart is an understatement, because there were major production issues and he wasn't produced correctly and shipped correctly. And I begged and pleaded for resources to go back into production, but unfortunately it was one of those MOQ things where we'd already produced a certain amount and we couldn't go back into production because that was going to be under MOQ, and MOTU Classics was just a drop in the bucket for a $7 billion company like Mattel. And I know this meant a lot of fans wanted to take Fisto's fist and smash me in the face with it. And it was horrible because I was on the sidelines, and I'm not, part of the engineering and manufacturing process. But the fact that Fisto didn't ship correctly is always going to be a black spot on the line. And honestly, I take full responsibility, even though I couldn't do anything about it at the time. I will note, though, that because of all the production issues with him, a lot of fans missed the fact that this figure had more deco reduction than any other character. He had all this deco on his rivets, and especially on his belt. If you look at the original version of him, his belt had way more deco on it. And this is how he was shown at San Diego Comic-Con, so fans saw this version. But I think because of the production issues, people forgot about this or didn't notice how much deco got removed from the figure in order to afford all those accessories. So, production issues aside, and honestly, I sincerely apologize to fans. I mean, I was the brand manager. The buck has to stop with someone, and it does stop with me. And yeah, it was frustrating, and I love Fisto, and he's one of my favorite characters, so seeing him not come out perfect absolutely crushed me. But for those who were able to get one, he's awesome, and I'm really proud of getting to work on him.